And, it's quite clear that Elon is doing God's work and he will be punished mightily for it. $25 million opportunity. It was the most grueling nightmare, I think, of my business career.
Government spent 2 years trying to put this effort in. And then after 2 years and millions of dollars spent, budget appropriated, a bunch of people working at it, nothing came out of it.
They're in the midst of trying to do the same thing today. And then what happens? They stretch out that technical solution for as long as they can because they get paid by the hour.
I think the thing that had to break for this information to become so publicly available was the disruption of legacy broadcast media by independent media.
There is a dramatic shift happening in the government right now as it pertains to a lot of things, but specifically around how the government is approaching modernizing the government, especially through software and dealing with contractors and et cetera, is so fascinating because Larry's experience for the last 20 years is a perfect showcase of how the government has left the deepest scars ever known on a person. Help us understand your experience, what you've dealt with, and why the conversation surrounding what's going on with Lutnick and Bessent and the Trump administration, why these are such a huge deal. And Doge. Yeah. So I'll throw it over to you and please drop as much wisdom on us as you can.
I built a company over some years when I first arrived into this country. We spun off quite a few products as we built the company. It was a software company. We were building software for PC networks. Our world started with a company we called Simple Software. After a little while, we morphed into a company called PowerFlex. You can see where we were going with that. And we built quite a few products, and we made a bit of a living out of selling these products off into other companies to take them to maturity. In about the time frame of the dot-com boom in 1999, I saw the writing on the wall because companies were being sold for gigantic sums of money when there was nothing there. It was kind of like today's AI business. And I decided that the time was right to actually sell the company. We closed a deal with Time Warner in our first year. It was a massive deal. It enabled us to do the conversion of the product from our old technology into this company's technology. Long story short, that the corporation, the public company, changed hands and brought in new management. And the new management decided, that's it. We're going into the insurance business. We're going into the insurance software business. So I had to quickly do a tap dance and say, "Yep, I'm a insurance software expert. I'll take care of the insurance software for you guys." And we did. We were very successful. And then we got a call. Where do we get a call from? The IRS. Now, normally when you get a call from the IRS, it's not a good thing. But this was in fact a call from the IRS to say, we need technology. We heard all about your technology. You will be in a competition, a bake-off with 25 other companies that are offering this business rules technology. Our core level technology was the old expert system business rules, which is how I come to AI originally. And by the way, just as an aside. And that's a long story, which I won't bore everybody.
I'll do a separate podcast. Yeah.
So that's setting the stage. We get this call from the IRS, very excited. Wow, what a possibility. What a great opportunity. We'll sell them our technology and we'll make a fortune. Anyway, we enter this bake-off and man, it is a grueling year. It took a year, one round after another round after another round. But lo and behold, we win the bake-off. We're selected. And we think, this is magical. This was easy. It only took a year and I don't know, $1 million or so. And here we are, $25 million opportunity. It was a nightmare. It was the most grueling nightmare, I think, of my business career.
$25 million contract from the IRS was the most grueling nightmare. So walk us through why it was a nightmare.
You know how Lutnick talked about all these attempts to build software for the federal government and how some software takes years and years and years and still not done, and how these contractors just take years and years and just buy more time because they're paid by the time, and it talks about modernizing the government. Well, let me tell you, our software was selected to help the modernization of the IRS, Part 2. This was the second attempt to modernize the IRS technology.
What year was this, Larry?
This was 2003, 2004. So the first attempt to modernize the technology, I understand, took place in the 80s. The technology goes back to the 60s. So just to explain how old this technology really was, it was being run on mainframes, which didn't sound like the end of the world in 2004, except the format for the software and the data was data tapes. Magnetic tapes. Do you know how old magnetic tapes are?
In 2004.
In 1969, 1970, I was running data tapes in my IBM 360 software. Before the 70s. And by then it was old technology. But because they couldn't buy data tape drives anymore, what they had done is written software to read data tape formats, to read and write data tape formats onto disk. So there the IRS is running this critical software using 40-year-old formats. Back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, they had tried to do a modernization program. It failed. So here we were in 2000. I think it was Clinton started this effort, and it was inherited, I guess, by the Bush administration. But Clinton's guy started the effort. We're going to modernize the IRS. And they brought in a contract, I think it was CSC at the time. And this contract was so big, it is multi-billion-dollar contract in those days. Today, it would be in the $10 billion range. It was so big, they built a whole 10-story building next to the IRS operations headquarters in Virginia. They built this 10-story building just for the team to do the modernization. We came in like the second or the third year of the process, and they bought our business rules engine, and they were going to modernize it. And so I headed up the team. I headed up the sale and then sort of headed up the team because it was so important. It was kind of the biggest contract we'd ever won in the United States for our company. And we go in there, we think, well, we're going to install the software, teach them how to use it, and Bob's your uncle, right? Oh, my God. That was when the trouble began. Firstly, we discover, yes, they've decided to buy our rules engine, but you don't just sell something to the federal government. Federal Acquisition Regulations, FAR. When you hear me say the word FAR, I'm talking about the encyclopedia that's like 100 sections long and 2 solid books. And there are many, many, many publications explaining what's in the FAR about contracting with the federal government. I mean, I looked at this thing and I said to myself, there's no way we could ever do this. They said, you're right, there's no way you can ever do this. You need a lawyer. And then where's the lawyer? The lawyer's in Washington, D.C. And what's the price of the lawyer?
Not cheap.
I mean, I can't even tell you how many hundreds of thousands of dollars went into the negotiation with the FAR, through the FAR, and what we had to do to comply. I mean, and that was 20 years ago, guys. In the 20 years, they've accrued a whole lot more stuff. It all ended after 4.5 months of negotiation. It ended up with myself, a colleague from Israel, who's, I think, our CFO, our two of our legal people, one of our legal people and one of the law firm that's $X thousand an hour, myself and one of my colleagues. sitting with like 5 of their lawyers and contracting officers or whatever. We literally K-barred the door. We locked the place up for like 3 days to come to final deal. Okay, we've done a deal. We're ready to go. All ready to go. And we go through our security process. We go through 3 days of training about what we're allowed to touch, what we're not allowed to read, what we're allowed to read, blah, blah, blah. And the fun begins. Turns out they've selected us, but nobody wants us.
How does that work? Hold on a second. 1 second. So they've selected you as the job, as a company to come in and do this modernization effort, right?
No, not to do the modernization effort. The modernization effort is like 1,000-person project.
Right.
We're there to provide the technology, the business rules engine to transfer all the rules about taxes into our engine so that their technology needs only to call our engine to get the results.
Got it.
Submit the data, get the results back. That's the theory.
So they chose you, but nobody wants to use you.
I mean, the last thing I want to do is use us because why? Because CSC gets gets X $100 for every hour they have a programmer on the job.
CSC is a contractor.
It's the prime contractor. I shouldn't even use their name. The prime contractor. And so when you bring in technology that's going to cut the job by like 2/3 or 3/4, that's a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about big bucks. And the thing about the prime contractor is they're kind of like the boss. They provide, all the top brass and they're like the boss. Yeah, they sit across the table. Every week we had this meeting. There was this gigantic table and all the high mucky muck sat around the table. There must have been 30 of them. And then all their support and the contracting people and the people in the project sat outside, around on the walls, and the little chairs that's put on the wall, sitting there with their paperwork this high, feeding their bosses. And I mean, and I would go to the project room, project room, it was a 10-story building, but I would go into the project, into some of the software areas and go to where our team was working, listening to a conversation. Then I'd go to this meeting at the end of the week, and the conversation bore absolutely no relationship to what was going on in the project. And the project had a plan. I have to say it was probably about 6 inches thick.
Yeah.
Per book, 5 books.
Wow.
Because somebody had planned out this project step by step, line by line, item by item. I mean, you couldn't have planned a more comprehensive disaster if you'd set about trying to sabotage this entire thing.
So the game at that time, at least, was to try and extend this as much as humanly possible, because the
game has never changed.
It's still the game.
I will take you 20 years later, just before I left, where I've had 3 run-ins with the federal government. That was the first. Had 3 additional large contracts.
Sorry, and was that implemented? Was the thing you were working with them, was that actually implemented?
Oh, we haven't even gone to the middle of the story.
How long did we set aside for this podcast?
I'll cut the long story short and tell you guys that somewhere about a year in, I went to the project lead, to the guy who is the VP of the project. I said, listen, Andy, we can do this project for you. 20 people, our technology, we can do end-to-end for you and deliver in under a year. They had just had like a 3-year extension, another $1 billion. I came to him, I said, Andy, we can do this for you. This is all we need. Let us set aside this group, 20 people, our technology. We'll even put it onto our hardware, and we'll deliver a complete project. And you can just do a like-for-like comparison. And we will only charge you $10 million. He said, it's impossible. I said, try me. Doesn't work. Don't pay us.
Yeah.
He got excited. He said, you need to take me to see. I said, we did this. When we did the bake-off, we took you to see. He said, no, I got to see it myself because, somebody else did. So we took like the lead and like 5 other people, senior people. And we took some senior program and we took them to some companies that we installed this stuff in. Big, really big, like one of the top insurance companies in the country. They come back, they're all excited. They said, yes, we got a permission. We got this approved by the high mucky mucks. You're good to go. We're excited. Actually, I think it may have been $20 million. I don't even remember. But it was a
good deal.
It was a tiny little bit of money. It was like pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Not even pennies, It was like nothing. And I'll never forget. It was like the night before a Jewish holiday. It was late in the evening. I remember speaking to my colleagues, the chairman of the company in Israel. I said, it's going to be signed tonight. Andy said that the last signature's coming tonight. We'll get it in the morning. You'll have it. Yes, you'll be closed tomorrow morning, but I'll call your homes and let you know it's all good. It's all good. Everybody's excited. Put their phone down. I'm waiting for the call. Call doesn't come. Finally, at about 9:00 at night, Andy's on the line, distraught. They cancelled it. Andy, what? I mean, we were signed. It was all done. Sorry, they decided it's too risky. I said, risk? You just committed another $1 billion, and you worried about this $20 million. Wait. The risk is to your $1 billion. That's the risk.
Wow.
Anyway, I had to phone the guys in the morning. I mean, it cost a lot of people, a lot of jobs. It cost, people. And that was it. I mean, I said, that's it. Never again. Never again. Now, it's not true. It wasn't never again. I went back to the federal government because they came to us about 7 years ago.
So before you go down that path real quick, Larry. So what happened with that initial job? Like what?
We were canceled.
So it went nowhere. That whole effort went nowhere.
Yeah. We got paid. We ended up probably earning, I don't remember the number, $4 or $5 million for the project for the time that we were there. And I left the company. I wasn't very happy at that company anyway. I did my earnout. I had done my job and I moved on.
So that whole stint was a year and a half, whatever it was, from beginning to end. A couple $1 billion.
We were there for 2 years. You
were there for 2 years. The government. Was
How much did you invest in it?
We didn't invest. This was the government spent the money. They spent $5 million with us, $4 to $5 million.
But you said you put at least $1 million into even getting considered, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about the sales part of it. Yeah, but we definitely recouped that money.
But the overarching premise here is that government spent 2 years trying to put this effort in. And then after 2 years and millions of dollars spent, budget appropriated, a bunch of people working at it, nothing came out of it.
That was just our piece of it. But
that was just your piece.
That was our piece. The kicker is they threw us out, or they canceled that particular venture.
Yeah.
But they had approved the second billion they'd spent the first $1 billion, they'd approved the second $1 billion. We were there to try and attempt to stop them spending that $1 billion.
Which is why you got the axe.
Which is why we got the axe. And the end of the story, that the whole frigging project was canceled.
Unbelievable.
But all the money got spent.
Yeah. I mean, all the $2 billion got spent. I don't remember which administration canceled it, but it was canceled. And that was the end of that. And that entire $2 billion, nothing is left of it. Now, I'll tell you something else. They're in the midst of trying to do the same thing today. This must be
10.
Part trace. No, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how many times they've done it.
So let me just summarize my understanding of what it sounds like is going on to me. A problem arises. It's a legitimate problem. It needs to be solved. And a whole bunch of technical people figure out, okay, this is how we're going to solve this problem. And they implement a plan. And then the plan gets participated in by a whole lot of other people that look at the problem
You
to be
missed it. You
solved
missed
as
a
an
whole-
opportunity.
You missed a whole step, Hans. Honestly, you missed
Okay.
a whole step. The identification of the problem is first a business identification, not a technical identification. From the governing the agency involved says we have a problem processing blah blah blah, or we have a problem getting blah 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 done. Let's bring some technical people in to tell us how to do it. So what do? They issue a requirement, and then they negotiate through the VAR, and they award that job to one or other contractor. And I'm going to tell you about the layers of contractors, because there is where the real grift happens. And then those contractors determine what the technical solution is. And then they go into contracting to issue a contract to get the technical solution fixed.
Got it.
And who wins that technical solution? The firm that designed the technical solution in the first place. So I'm going to tell you all about those contractors in a moment. And then what happens? They stretch out that technical solution for as long as they can, because they get paid by the hour.
Please.
And they modify and modify and modify and modify and modify the contract.
I have a friend who it's so funny you say that, because I have a close friend of mine who has worked in consulting in conjunction with the government for a long time, for almost 10 years, and I can't tell you how many times that theme comes up, where it's like it's exactly this thing. It's there are jobs put together that never get implemented, and they cost a fortune. Yeah, and it always
feature, not a bug.
happens. It always happens.
Now, I'll give you the short story of the third episode. The short story of the third episode of my relationship with this federal government is a very similar process took place. I don't want to get into the depths of it and who, why, because it's...
Yeah.
But this is a project that they were decided to do under the first Trump administration, they decided to do to reform the blah, blah, blah. I don't want to even mention the industry because it's real and it's very relatively new, relatively recent. And we got involved in demonstrating to the contractor who had done the specification how we could do it better than any other. And this contractors loved it. They were really focused on fixing the problem. I want to talk about contractors and the nature of them in a moment, but we supplied the technology. We got paid for it. We supplied the services to help them get the technology up. They built the project. That was remarkable, I thought. I couldn't believe it. They built start to finish, end to end. They built a project during the tenure of the Trump administration. And it was a great project. It was a gregreat product.
First Trump administration, 2016.
First Trump administration. Yeah. Election happens. Administration changes. Halt. We've been asked, they said, to halt the contract. They're going to review. The new management is going to review, to make the decision that it's the right thing to do, and so on and so forth, before it gets put into operation and gone live, closed down.
So it changed hands from an administration to administration, and then the new administration is like, no thanks. And the question becomes, how often does that happen?
Every change of administration.
Yeah.
And I even hesitate to tell you the amount of money because I don't want this identified, but it was in the millions. But I cannot tell you how many times this has happened.
Yeah.
I've been involved in 3 or actually 4 of these events.
Wow. Personally.
Now, yeah. My firm.
And each time it ends the same exact way.
No, we have one project. I can talk about one project which has been remarkably successful. And the reason it's been remarkably successful is because the government didn't run the project. The government simply contracted for a service. And this project that we did was to the contractor who was to supply the service. And we provided the technology and the method and all the support to get this contractor to be very, very profitable and very functional and very responsive to the government requirement.
Got it.
What's interesting about that is that the government then tried to adopt the technology that we'd sold this contractor because it'd been so successful. And they brought it in-house, and it ended the same veil of tears as the earlier ones.
Wow.
All I'm trying to say is that, so let's talk about government contractors.
Actually, before we do that, let me bring in Amit, because we've had Amit here for the last half hour. We haven't had a chance. So did you have any, did you have anything from your perspective?
No, I think what he's saying makes a lot of sense. I mean, it underscores the legacy contractors and how they've dealt with the government. So just listening to the story it's quite fascinating, because it hasn't seemed like much has changed over the past 30 years. And Elon is attempting to make a change, but he's getting pushback for a lot of the reasons you got pushback for, which is just that these are legacy ways of getting things done, and it's really hard to make a change.
I mean, the legacy adds layers every administration and every year, because legislation just adds to the, as soon as there's some or other thing go wrong, as soon as there's another, blow up, they add more protection, they add more layers. And so you get more and more and more sections to the FAR. The FAR is about 50 sections long, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And by the way, there's a separate FAR for the defense. And so you've got not one 562 page volume, you've got multiples. And so what happens is that it becomes almost impossible to achieve success.
So what's interesting about that, and then before we hit contractors in a bit here, so the Lutnick discussion, here's what's very interesting about this. So the one thing that Lutnick brought up was that it seems like the government, instead of trying to go through this process, they're going to put it on the private companies to build something for the government and then give it to
$0.
Exactly.
$0. Yeah.
Which bypasses this insane thing that the United States government has been dealing with. And so that what you end up with is a finalized product that can just be used by the federal government from the get, right?
What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I got to collect tariffs, right? So I go to one of the great software companies of the earth, and I say, I want you to give me, you're going to build for me for America. You're going to build the greatest customs processing ever.
But what's incredible is you're convincing these companies to basically do right for America and build this software for you. You think that's going to be a movement throughout the government, or is that?
Here's the idea. I say, build it for me for free.
Yeah.
I put it in for free. I don't know. What other countries in the world do you think are going to buy now?
Right. If it works for us.
Well, remember, you have to connect to me.
Yeah.
So every country's going to buy it.
Right.
You just give it to me. And then I do QA on it, and I can take it. If you sell it to me for $1, we go into government hell.
Right. The whole rigmarole.
All you do is deliver the product and say, guys, test it. And if it works for you, you can have it.
Got it.
And that's functionally what we were trying to do. I just didn't make the leap back in 2005, 2004. I didn't make the leap to say, we want $10 million for this or whatever, $1 million. You can have it for free. I didn't make that leap.
And so what's the win for the business when they do that? Like what benefit do they get?
When the federal government buys it, takes it and starts using it, you can then go to every state in the country, you can go to every government in the world and say, hey, this is the IRS's technology. For only $1 a return or whatever, we'll supply it to you.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're leveraging the power of the federal government in terms of your sale. What better sale? Look, it's just very, very creative. And I just didn't get, I didn't see that. I wasn't creative enough. And I'm not sure anybody can easily, I think it's very difficult to be that creative.
Well, it's very hard to say, hey, get this product that I'm going to spend millions of dollars of resources on for free. That's a very, very difficult thing to come to the conclusion of as a business, Yeah,
but think about the $1 million we spent in just participating in the
for sure.
in the bake-off. We could have saved that $1 million and just spent it on the application because $1 million for a 25-person bake-off is a huge amount of investment and a very high level of confidence. How different is that?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with how much of that was actually Palantir's exact playbook when they were first rolling out, the various platforms to the Department of Defense
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding of this, Palantir had a lot of the same struggles that Larry's talking about right here. The one thing Palantir did, which was kind of revolutionary when it comes to procuring software from the government, is they sued in 2011 and they won the lawsuit. And the premise of the lawsuit was not to use Palantir software, but it was rather to be meritocratic in terms of procuring defense software, because our nation needs the best software, right? And if you give it to Lockheed Martin just because their board of directors knows a certain guy, then that's not a good thing. So there have been some minor changes when it comes to procurement of software in different areas, but I would still imagine a lot of Palantir's business also is because of just lobbying today, which is the majority of defense contractor.
Well, the reason that I ask is because I know specifically that I've heard anecdotes about them providing service directly to the forward operating like special forces groups. And that I think they did those things for free because it bypassed a lot of this. And then they were able to work on developing the project, developing the software. And, they obviously would pay their own forward deployed engineers who were then with those special operations groups. And I think those were on their dime as well. And then they were able to sell it, because they had the proof case for the value add.
What's interesting about this time? I feel like if you're a very strong software company, especially with this administration, the way that they've changed the game, I feel like you're about to get such tremendous wins because there's so many low-hanging fruits in government. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Federal, state, local.
I'm very skeptical. I'm very skeptical that they're going to be able to really reform it.
Why?
Because it is so built in that I think that the nature of the nature of our constitutional structure is that administrations really only have a very short window to implement change. This administration is only for 3 years and three-quarter years left. It doesn't even have the normal potential 8 years. But every administration faces elections within 4 years from inauguration, and they face congressional elections within 2 years of administration. So, and they have to get continuing resolutions, and they have to get the debt ceiling lifted. So the calendar is so replete that, and they face a very truculent and very well-established legal world where the judiciary have now become involved in the operational side of the government. So the machinery is against any real advance. I think that's why Elon is moving with such rapidity, and the Trump administration trying to move with such rapidity. But time is going to catch up.
Yeah. I think the function of changing leaders out every 2 to 4 to 6 years, that rotation of leadership by default creates an environment that is extremely difficult to uphold a certain type of culture because the culture is directly derived from the leadership. And so if you're constantly changing leadership, and so that is one of the arguments as to why, which I am very big fan of, is why keeping government as small as possible is a good idea, because you limit the impact of that type of change of leadership constantly hoarding more and more of the resources in a country's economy to the point where 32% of the US GDP is now strictly government-related business, which is by default, just from this experience, the most inefficient by far, right?
Yeah, the waste, waste and fraud, they talk about waste and fraud in the same sentence.
Yeah.
But they're tightly bound. I mean, you don't know how much is fraud and how much is waste in the end, because in a way they're tied in. When you read some of these contracts, and then of course there are the NGOs, and NGOs are simply a structure to advance the distribution of money to friends and family.
Yeah.
And maybe do some good. I mean, I don't want to detract from those NGOs that actually do some good, but it is very marginal today. So I've lost all confidence in our constitutional structure simply because of these built-in problems.
Yeah. And I don't blame you for that. Before we move into contractors, Ahmed, I know you got to go here in a couple minutes. Did you want to throw something in, a topic or a point before we let you get back to your day?
Again, I think we talked about it in the last podcast. I'm really impressed. I'm rooting for Elon. I hopefully think it can play out. I know Larry's a big fan of it as well, but your skepticism is valid, right? Because can Elon really take down this entire bureaucratic complex? So I hope it plays out. I think we've been seeing a lot more updates over the past couple of weeks of just like encouraging signs. But yeah.
How do you feel? Like if you were to give us like your sort of like your underlying vibe, your underlying sort of what you're seeing in the next 2 to 4 years, like if you were to play out like something, like how do you view it?
Well, Trump's giving him access, right? So he got to meet with the DOD, Pete Hegseth, the other day. Trump's giving him unilateral access to go do whatever he needs to do to talk to these agencies. I am skeptical as well that by July 4th, 2026, this will be resolved. I think they're going to need a little bit more time. And I think, quite frankly, given all these tariff delays, if we see that Elon's made a lot of progress, maybe not $1 trillion in cuts, but like $450 billion, Trump would just extend Doge until the end of the term. I think Trump needs Doge as much as Elon wants to be part of Doge, especially to get bond yields to come down. So you need cost cutting, or the perception of cost cutting, to be relevant to the market, which means Doge, I think, should be around for a much longer time. So I don't think it ends on Independence Day 2026. I think it goes further. But I think given how friendly Trump has been with Elon, he's going to have access to do whatever he wants, hopefully.
Amit, do you think that the issue isn't whether Elon is there or not? The issue is whether he can force a reform in how the agencies go about their business. In other words, it's not so much being able to force a cut today.
Right.
It's a matter of changing practice and changing habit. And that's going to be more important than the actual cut he makes today.
100%.
Because, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, you're right. It's going to be really hard. If anyone could do it, hopefully we have a structural change in all these agencies. But yeah, you're right to be skeptical, because it's like the next administration, if this Doge thing is not around, is just going to have people that continue to fill it up with bottlenecks, which makes it really hard for there to be a long-term change.
One of the things that strikes me in all of this is just that I think if more people understood what you understand, Larry, by experience, that there would be public desire, and I think there is public desire at this point, to say, we want the clarity, we want the transparency to see why does the government continue to waste so much money. And that's one of the big things about Doge. And what you're talking about is it's so common.
Hans, I live in a middle-class Jewish community. People I speak to, they're not open to hearing these facts. They don't believe it. They don't believe Trump. They don't believe these facts. They think government is here for output, to do good.
Are good.
And are good people. And yeah, there may be one or two bad eggs, but for the most part, they're doing good. I think there is just, amongst the majority of people who vote consistently for the Democratic Party, there's a very strong, belief in the reliability and the good of government.
Yeah. Pro-institutions.
I'm not too worried about that subset of people, because they definitely are. They lost the coalition, and I don't see it coming back anytime soon. But if we have the opportunity at this point in time to force the software structural changes, and we can do it by using the free software on-ramp as a wedge to get the software in there, that the software itself creates the transparency, like Palantir. This is one of the reasons why there has been pushback against Palantir in NSA circles, and NSA doesn't want to use it, is because they don't want the transparency. And so if Elon and Howard Lutnick and competent software professionals can get stuff like Palantir that has full auditability from end to end on all of this stuff, and raises flags when we have this type of waste in it, if they can install that in the next 18 months to 4 years, which would be quite the feat, I guess that is one area where I might have more hope.
I don't know.
Do you think that's feasible?
I just, when you look at the voting pattern, it was close. Look, if you look at the House of Representatives, they have like a handful of majority, handful, and it could turn. We could lose the Wisconsin election, this election for the state judge in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and if we do that, we will lose 3 to 5 representatives in Wisconsin alone in the next election. Trump, and so once that happens, then, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. Amit, go ahead.
No, I was going to say anything. I was just.
Oh.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate you for stopping
Thanks,
in. Yeah, appreciate you, brother. All right. Talk next time. I think to sort of the point around institutions, I do think that, it is I think what Doge and all the things that are happening now are so good at setting a tone of how it should work. But I think the go forward movement and the go forward momentum and the go forward culture, that is the actual hard part. That's going to be the actual true hard part, because I think the institution comment is, fundamentally speaking, there's a significant subset of the country that is going to be like, once life gets good enough, and this is how we got to this point, is would be my argument. Once life is good enough for the average citizen, then the grift can really begin, because nobody is paying attention. What's insane about this country is that even though we are $36 trillion in debt, and our interest on our debt is more than our defense budget, okay, you can still make it so that the average person in the country is happy enough. And if the average person is
the average person is not happy enough. The average person is not. I mean, I'm here in the mountains of North Carolina, and I've spent the last 2 years on the road, on and off.
Yeah.
Once you get out of the cities, people are not happy.
Yeah, it's despair, for sure.
It is. I mean, it is not funny. It is desperately serious.
But I guess my point is like, the point I'm trying to make is, let's say Doge is successful. Let's say the Lutnick program does create a fundamental modernization of our systems in the U.S. government, and we have all these things set up, and we are in the direction of going somewhere good, right? We're still not going to be 100% of the way through. We might be like 20% of the way through what it should be. But once you get that momentum going, people are like, okay, I am happy. I'm happy we're going here, right? How many people are going to tune out and go back to their lives to try and build something, and then the grift begins again on the back end?
Yeah, if we could get like 10 or 15 or 20% deflation, and cost of living goes down, and people don't feel the same amount of challenge. I just don't see us getting there, but
yeah, the fundamental problem is go ahead.
Deflation is not a good thing, Hans. Deflation is much worse than inflation. You definitely do not want deflation under any circumstances.
We're about to get an deflation debate. I can sense it.
There's nothing to debate. I mean, ask any economist. I mean, I'm pretty serious on the subject. Deflation is catastrophic. Deflation is what the 30s was all about, and it is catastrophic.
The argument is you don't want to incentivize savings over spending.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a really vicious cycle. It's so difficult to get out of. Just ask anybody in the 30s. We lived through the 30s. It was catastrophic. Now, ask any economist. They'll tell you that you don't want deflation. What you want is, you don't want very high inflation. We think 2% is the right number, maybe 3%, maybe 1%. We don't know.
I mean, it really depends on what your growth rate is. You can have way more inflation if your growth rate is high enough.
No, because what happens is, if your growth rate is very high and inflation starts climbing, then you get into a very bad cycle. The thing about economics is that it's incredibly difficult to maintain a balance. The opportunity of swinging into one or other extreme is always there. And once you get towards those extremes, it's awfully difficult to claw back. So you always want to maintain some degree of balance. And, it's like saying, I just want a little bit of deflation. Well, it turns out a little bit of deflation can be very catastrophic. But you also don't want more than a little bit of inflation, because more than a little bit of inflation can also be. So That's
How do you think about that with housing? Because that's what they've talked about, wanting to do a lot of things that are very deflationary to housing. And this was even part of the all-in discussion that, so many Americans have their net worth tied up in the home that they own. And we have a lot of financial games that get played to ensure that number go up on the real estate market. But the problem is that, a huge swath of the population has no access to buying real estate because the asset prices have been inflated so much. So, if we do try to deflate asset prices on real estate, how does that tie into all this?
Who's trying to deflate asset prices on real estate?
I feel like was that not part of Scott Bessent's conversation that we need to do some things to stimulate
we need to definitely
growth
moderate.
and supply?
Yeah, we need to increase the growth. That doesn't necessarily mean deflate prices. It means make sure that there are, available housing at prices people can afford.
Well, if you increase competition, does that not reduce the prices? And is the reduction in prices not deflation? I guess maybe I'm not.
Reduction in growth of prices. So there's one thing that you must understand, that the cost of new supply is very different to the value of existing housing, right? If you have enough new supply, then perhaps you'll get some deflation in housing costs. But a deflation in housing costs is not a general deflation. It's a reduction in cost of that good, which, it may be a deflation in housing, but it's not a deflation in the economy
overall.
as a whole. So there are a lot of factors to it, but in general, you don't want a deflationary economy. You don't want too high an inflationary economy, but you definitely want to have that small amount of inflation that is less than the growth of productivity, right? But a deflation implies a reduction in productivity. It means a reduction in the gross national product. Means a reduction in everybody's wealth.
So Farzad, at this point, do you want to go back and tie into the All-In podcast more again, or where do we want to go?
I want to hear about the contractor piece. I was listening to your all's discussion about the inflation deflation, but let's I had to use the bathroom. I had too much water, sorry. Okay, so the contractor piece. Walk us through the contractor.
So you're going to understand that the contracting in Washington, D.C. is a grift. It's a very serious grift. So there are these Beltway bandits around the Beltway of Washington, D.C. And the Beltway bandits are the standard contractors who always win all these contracts. So there's a set aside in federal contracting for, I don't know, it's paragraph 8 or section 8 contractors. Who are they? They're people from a minority, or the minority-owned businesses, or women-owned businesses, or injured or disabled veterans. There's a class for each of those, and they each get some advantage in contracting. So if you're a women-owned business, you get an offset on your contracting bid. So if you bid $1 million or $1 billion, you get some reduction in that pricing when you bid. And so, can you believe it? There are a whole bunch of these minority-owned businesses, disabled-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, all around Washington, D.C., and the Beltway. There are a bunch of them, and they're constantly winning contracts. It's a grift, because even though they're owned by a woman or a disabled veteran or a minority, that's just the face of it. That's the guy who gets the contract. Then that guy who gets the contract awards it to, I don't know, one of the larger contractors. The guy in the front, the guy who's the injured guy or the disabled veteran or whatever, takes the 5% of the cut, and that's it. And that's how all the contracts work.
Well, yeah. It's just so mind blowing to me that this was. I mean, again, I think the beauty of this time. At least I'm going to speak on my behalf, and then I don't know if Hans, you want to back this up, or maybe sort of. I don't even know if this is like I'm just so fucking naive. I had very little understanding of this up until very recently, and it took a sort of, I don't know, reinventing of communication by our federal government or the access to what was going on by our federal government to really understand, at least in part way, what was going on. And the only other way you would know this was going on is if you knew somebody who was who worked with government, right? So it's like outside of those situations, I was completely and utterly unaware of how I had a sense, but that the depth of it was something that I just did not appreciate.
I think the thing that had to break for this information to become so publicly available was the disruption of legacy broadcast media by independent media. That legacy broadcast media was heavily curated to filter out any of this type of information from getting to the vast majority of people.
Because
that doesn't mean that people didn't know, but yeah.
They were in on the grift in a certain way too, right? I mean, what was that one contract to the... Oh, Larry, you're out. You're muted. Yeah. I think your dog had something to say.
Yeah, it's very difficult to separate, NPR and National Public Radio and public television are part of the grift. It goes, the moment government starts giving money, people's hands start reaching in.
Yeah.
And then within time, as time goes on, more and more hands have been in, more layers are built up, and then you get corruption. I mean, the level of corruption, say, of political corruption now is endemic because all of these public institutions have become Democrat, ruled organizations.
Majority of them, at least.
Majority. Well, I don't know about majority. I think all of the NPR and all of public.
I think there are a lot of defense-related ones that are usually, they lean right. That would also be grifting on the U.S. government.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair statement. I was really talking about the broadcast organizations.
Gotcha. Oh, the broadcast one, yeah, for sure.
And the NGOs. But I think what you're saying about and by the way, a lot of the Republican Party NGOs are as corrupt.
Yeah.
And many of them, are very, very strongly opposed to the Trump attempts to reform because they're part of the grift. Yeah. they're part of the in crowd, they're part of the grift. And a lot of this turns out to be, simply the terms limit problem. People come to Washington, they buy a house, they establish their family, they just want to stay on because the grift is so comfortable. And so,
and because of the opaqueness of the systems in the government that would have brought transparency to this, it was extremely easy to hide the grift. And what I mean by hide, I mean it was so hard to track down because of the lack of transparency that you could get away with basically anything. And when the media is not covering it and nobody's paying attention to it, and then you have a free ticket to whatever you want, basically. You just got to get to know the right people.
Anyway, all of this was my personal experience. And, in a way, I was responsible for it as well because I never spoke up. I never spoke up. In a way, I definitely profited from it. Yeah, we didn't get that one big contract that we thought was going to be, a huge, huge gift to the government. But we still took millions out of that first project, and we've taken millions out of subsequent projects with the government. So who am I to criticize it? I'm a beneficiary of it.
Well, you didn't go out of your way to move to DC to implement a permanent barnacle.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, that's true. So, should I give myself a pat on the back, or am I just a
I think you should
person?
give a nice slap on the face with one hand and a pat on the back with the other one.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's terribly easy to fall into this way of life. Yeah. Terribly easy. And I have friends who are there and who remain there, and it's tragic.
I mean, when the government can spend $6.7 trillion a year, like talk about a honeypot, Yeah. I would almost bring up the argument: should one entity be able to spend that much money a year?
Well,
You
they're
know?
spending what amounts to $20,000 per person in the United States of America.
Per year.
That's what they spend. Yeah, that's what the mental arithmetic seems to present that number to my head. So if they're spending $20,000 per head, I mean, why do we bother working? Why don't they just send us the check and be done with it?
That'd be nice. What we can do the work.
Yeah. And that's just at the federal level. That doesn't even include
Right.
all your state and local. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Which
the
is about half
interesting-
the size of federal.
But the interesting thing is they employ so many more people.
It's true.
Federal government only employs like somewhere between 2 million for the civilian workers and 6.5 if you include all the defense and all the other people. I've heard the figure of 6.5 million. But I look at the federal employees alone, excluding military, and it's only 2 million. But state and local governments employ apparently 20 million.
Yeah. But they don't spend as much. They don't spend as much. Yeah. Because they don't, the honeypot's not nearly as, because it's much more distributed.
And they don't have as many NGOs.
Exactly. So isn't that a fascinating thing to think about, right? So the federal, the state and local, go ahead.
one of the factors in that, sorry to interrupt, but it's really important on why there's a difference between federal and state is because the states they're mandated that they have to have balanced budgets. And the federal government is not.
They aren't all mandated. About a third of them are have deficit spending. I did a post on this. About 60% or so, from memory, of the state governments that are democratic have got a massive deficit. Most of the Republican governments have got a balanced budget and or a small deficit. A few have got a surplus. There are many governments that are mandated to have a balanced budget, but many are not mandated. I have a post out and somebody criticized the post and we had a back and forth, but you can read it.
That's interesting. So, but even at that statement, the states are much more constrained in their ability to run deficits than the federal government would be a fair statement.
Yeah, and it's interesting that some are forced to spend money by the federal government, and some are actually supplemented by the federal government, because the federal government actually in many Republican states have a deficit of spending because they spend more than they take in by way of Social Security payments and other payments they spend on benefits for those states. So the poorest states like Missouri, for example, sends far less money to the federal government than they get back from the federal government. Anyway.
They should make an amendment for the federal budget to be balanced every year.
Yes, I agree.
I like Warren Buffett's idea that every time they fail to pass or to balance the budget, that every single sitting member of the Senate gets, and the Senate or maybe it was the Congress that he said that they're ineligible for re-election.
I love it.
Yeah, I just want to warn you that sometimes it is absolutely vital to have a deficit in times of in very bad times when we do have a recession. It's important to have a deficit because the government can provide the means to support the country, and it's legitimate, I think, for the government to go into debt in times of travail like war.
Yeah.
Like,
but they have to invoke something. Like this should be in the amendments. Like you have to invoke this in order to run a deficit. Otherwise, forget it. And if you invoke this is the counter. This is what happens.
Yeah, but then you specifically get whatever this is that you must invoke, because that's the thing that
you always go to war.
Yeah. Cue highlight reel of the last century.
Yeah, my sense is we probably won't solve it forever, but I think I think it's very pleasant to hear members of the government, such senior people like Besant and Lutnick, talk about this quiet thing that we've not heard of before. And we say, I've said these things to friends and family, and some of my family get very angry with me. But it's really nice to hear some of this being said. Whether it'll lead to action, well, it has led to action. I mean, clearly what Elon is doing is incredible.
Yeah.
Whether it's enough, whether he can make it stick, whether it'll happen, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I have this innate skepticism born of years of experience with dealing with this government.
Can we go a little bit deeper on that? We had 3 incredible podcasts released by the All In podcast group this last week. There was obviously the one with Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who led the transition team, and then there was the normal All In podcast where the 4 besties got together with Cyan Bannister, and then they kind of recapped some of their takeaways from everything. But Larry, as someone who has been so close to this for so long and who then follows the All In podcast so closely, what were the things that you learned in those 3 conversations this last week that were most exciting to you? And then which ones are you most either scared about or maybe skeptical of?
I was stunned by the depth of perception and understanding displayed by both Bessent and Lutnick in the real problems. Not the usual political blah, blah, blah problems, but the real problems. I found it very difficult to believe that I was listening to somebody in government.
In the cabinet, no less.
In the cabinet, yeah. I was stunned. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just add to that, not only that you heard it, but to hear it in that, like, they talked about it publicly and in long format as well. That was one of the things that blew me away, is that this is, a huge shift, and I think marks a seismic shift in U.S. politics. Like, this moment will be looked at as a moment when the way that government is done and interacts with the people changed forever.
If you want to get elected, you have to go on Rogan.
I think what Hans said is very perceptive. And by the way, I don't think Rogan does it. I mean, Rogan is still really at the level of political discourse.
He's more culture than anything.
Well, and maybe you're right for getting elected, but there's a difference between getting elected and then managing PR of doing the hard work of governing.
You got it.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I listened to a 60-minute interrogation of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And it was this rapid fire, gotcha. And he had to explain why it wasn't a gotcha. Rapid fire. And this is what we got used to in terms of in-depth reporting. There was never this, as Hans said, this long form, detailed explanation without the gotcha questions, with the negative with the negative implication. The guy was allowed to go, but both Bessent and Lutnick were allowed to explain in greater and greater detail. Now, in both conversations, they weren't challenged with the counter argument, because both in those cases, the questioners were more interested in what they had in mind than in challenging them. And it would have been good to have challenging, but only in a long form, only in not this gotcha kind of questioning. Oh yeah, but when did you stop beating your wife? No, I mean, that's the kind of questioning that goes on. Anyway, the point is that that was my great surprise. And then on the podcast itself, I just have to say, I think we could do with less moderation by the moderator, but I'll get off. I won't.
Shout out Jason.
I mean, things go so much better when Jason's not there. I can't tell you. Anyway,
I love it. Yeah,
Jason's he's a good guy. He's a good guy.
I think the point of the media landscape has just fundamentally changed forever is such a good point. And I think the beauty behind that is that it's going to get so many people more engaged in this world whose talents are going to be so needed in the coming decades, right? So I think the perception for the longest time has been, if you really want to get stuff done, you don't go to government. If you want to make money, you go to government. If you want to, good.
If you want to grift.
Yeah, if you want to, if you want to grift in the worst case scenario, and if you want sort of like a stable life with good pay, that you're always going to lock in dollars. You just go for government because they'll take care of you. But now, I think there's a fundamental shift with this administration, and I hope this holds true forever, is that now it feels like a cutting edge private sector place where there is a crisis that we have to solve. There's something very important we have to do, and we have to work as hard as humanly possible to make it happen. And that's a very, and the people talking about it are going on these long form podcasts talking about why we need to do these things, right? And I wonder if we're going to get a revitalization of people wanting to go and fix government. We talked about the skepticism of the culture, right? But on the other side, if there is media covering what's going on and there is transparency, and we come up with this sort of holy grail moment where everybody will always be able to know when something's going wrong and people need to come around it, then that's a potential recipe for a good side. But listen, I totally get why we think that's not going to happen, because again, once people get comfortable enough, why do that?
It's not just comfortable, it's the money, that Larry mentioned earlier, that there's, unless, like, when you have large sums of unguarded money, it just, magically, why are there pirates here? Where did they all come from? They're just here.
Yeah. It's the honeypot is just so attractive. Shouldn't be
fascinating thing to track anyway. At the very least.
And it's quite clear that Elon is doing God's work, and he will be punished mightily for it.
But I think he'll be remembered in a very positive light. I really
who
do
knows?
think so.
I mean, who knows?
It depends on whether he's successful.
Yeah.
History is written by the victors. So if he wants to be remembered well, he has to be victorious.
Seems to have a pretty good average with victory. So I think that's the one thing he's got going for him.
Yeah. Well, I wish him well, because it may cost us our share. It may cost us the profit on our shares, but I still wish him well. I think that what he's doing is so important, and it is amazing how people just are blind to it and they just will not let it happen. I guess what's interesting about it is that these politicians who are directly impacted are going crazy about it. We know why. We understand why. But that the general public doesn't see it. And the general public, I mean, it boggles the mind.
Well, the general public is very, the polling around like Doge and Doge adjacent is quite positive for Doge. I think the reservations that I see are from a quote unquote non-elected official in Elon, which technically through the Trump administration saying that we're going to make him head of Doge, is technically not directly elected, but part of the administration in some way. They're uncomfortable with that person having that much power. That's what I see. But it's like, hey, listen, like my thing is, and we talk about it here too, if you execute and you do a good job, and then it's obvious that life is much better for everybody, and everybody can see that it's much better for everybody, and you can feel it firsthand, that's how you overcome that. You have to execute. And if you execute, here's the deal. If you execute, I don't see how the Democrat Party is a party in the next 10, 20 years. Because you had all this in front of you. If you execute at a high level and you take care of all this stuff, how are you able to fight back with something that executed on something that needed to be executed on for the last 30, 40, 50 years?
That's what everybody said to me in 65 after Johnson came in. I'm a huge majority. And the Republicans were, they'd lost so many seats. They were in the minority in both the Senate and the House, and the Democrats had the Supreme Court.
Did he execute though?
Yeah, they executed the United States. They executed. They might as well put us on the gallows, because that was when Johnson spent all that money, guns and butter. He went into Vietnam heavily, and he went into social security, social welfare very heavily. And both those programs nearly cost us our country.
But that's my point. My point is, if Trump admin can actually make life better, and there's peace, and economy is booming, and the deficit is let's say, balance in the best case scenario, and there's an obvious trend towards things getting much, much, much better very soon. That's my point. Like, if you do a good job, it's like with any administration, if you do a good job, you're gonna get votes. But especially now, because the problems they're tackling are so fundamental. Usually
Great.
when, I don't know. Yeah.
Great. I'll let them know that you said so.
Thank you. All right. Let's wrap it up.
It's great. Thank you,
Thank you,
guys, for listening to my bleats and moans and groans.
Very insightful, honestly, Larry. I think this was very insightful, and I think as more and more as we go deeper and deeper into this administration, I think these conversations are going to be more and more valuable for the general public to understand just what has been going on and the level of it, and hopefully continued transparency and increased transparency from not just this administration, but all administrations moving forward, so that we as taxpayers know where this money is going, which will be a great service. So thank you, Larry.
Thanks, guys.